If you think you know what hell looks like, you haven't seen ADX Florence. Before we descend into the darkest corner of the American prison system, do me a favor, smash that subscribe button, hit the bell icon, and drop a comment telling me which inmate's story haunts you the most. Trust me, you'll need that notification because what comes next will make this look like a warm-up. Now, let's go where even hardened criminals fear to tread. The desert wind howls across the barren Colorado plateau, carrying with it the whispers of men who have been erased from the world. Here, 115 miles south of Denver, sits a fortress that doesn't appear on most maps, a place where America buries its worst nightmares alive. ADX Florence, the administrative maximum facility, the Alcatraz of the Rockies, the final stop for those the government has deemed too dangerous to ever see daylight again. On a frozen morning in January 2017, a convoy of black SUVs rolled across the empty highway leading to the prison. Inside one of them sat Joaquin Archivaldo Guzman Lora, better known as El Chapo, the billionaire drug lord who had escaped maximum security prisons twice before, once through a mile-long tunnel dug beneath his shower drain. His empire had flooded American streets with tons of cocaine, heroin, and methamphetamine. He had ordered the murders of thousands, bribing entire governments and turning portions of Mexico into war zones. But this time, there would be no tunnel, no bribed guards, no helicopter extraction. This time, El Chapo was entering a tomb designed by the world's best security architects, a place engineered to break the unbreakable. The prison emerged from the landscape like a concrete cancer, its tan walls blending with the dead earth surrounding it. No guard towers pierce the sky here. No razor wire glints in the sun. ADX Florence doesn't need those theatrical touches. Its power lies in what you cannot see, in the layers of steel and surveillance that make escape not just impossible, but unthinkable. Inside, the architecture itself is a weapon. The facility houses 410 cells, each one a 7-by-12-foot coffin of poured concrete. The bed is concrete. The desk is concrete. The stool is concrete. Everything is designed to eliminate any object that could be used as a weapon or tool. A single 4-inch wide window, positioned so the inmate can only see a sliver of empty sky, never the ground, never the horizon, offers the only connection to the outside world. 23 hours a day, every day, for years that blur into decades, inmates sit in these boxes, alone with their thoughts and the ghosts of their crimes. But El Chapo is not alone in this netherworld. He shares it with the architect of the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, Ramzi Youssef, whose failed attempt to topple the Twin Towers killed 6 people and injured over 1,000. 3 cells down sits Theodore Kaczynski, the Unabomber, whose 17-year reign of terror through meticulously crafted mail bombs killed 3 and wounded 23. There's Robert Hansen, the FBI agent turned Russian spy, who sold America's deepest secrets for diamonds and cash. There's Terry Nichols, who helped Timothy McVeigh murder 168 people in the Oklahoma City bombing. Zacarias Musesa, the only person convicted in American courts for the September 11th attacks, paces in his cell, his mind slowly fragmenting in the silence. These are men who orchestrated mass murder, toppled governments, and terrorized nations. And yet, within these walls, they are nothing. They are numbers. They are ghosts. They are forgotten. The guards call it administrative segregation. Prisoners call it the clean version of hell. Psychologists call it something else entirely, a form of torture that destroys the human mind, piece by piece, synapse by synapse. Studies have shown that prolonged solitary confinement causes hallucinations, paranoia, anxiety, depression, and permanent cognitive damage. The brain, deprived of social interaction and sensory stimulation, begins to cannibalize itself. Some inmates talk to the walls. Others lose the ability to form coherent sentences. Some simply stare into the middle distance, their minds retreating into darkness from which they may never return. But here's what the public doesn't know, what the federal government doesn't advertise in its press releases about the Supermax. ADX Florence wasn't built just to house dangerous criminals. It was built to make them disappear. To erase them so completely from public consciousness that they might as well be dead. And for some inmates, that erasure is exactly what someone wants. Because 3 months after El Chapo arrived, something happened that wasn't supposed to be possible within those concrete walls. An inmate, a man convicted of crimes so heinous his name was scrubbed from public records, was found dead in his cell. The official report called it suicide. But when the internal investigation team arrived and began examining the scene, they noticed something that sent ice through their veins. The cell door had been opened from the outside. And the security footage from that corridor, the footage that recorded every movement, every breath, every shadow, had been deleted. Someone with access, someone with authority, had orchestrated a murder inside the most secure prison on Earth. And they had done it without leaving a trace. The investigation began in silence, the way everything begins at ADX Florence. Special Agent Marcus Reeves of the FBI's Correctional Intelligence Unit arrived 48 hours after the body was discovered, his credentials granting him access to a facility where even senators were routinely denied entry. He had investigated prison murders before, gang hits carried out with sharpened toothbrushes and knotted bedsheets, but this was different. This wasn't a crime of opportunity or revenge between inmates. This was surgical, planned, executed with the kind of precision that required inside knowledge and institutional power. The dead man's name was Viktor Konstantin Volkov, a former Russian intelligence operative turned international arms dealer who had been convicted of supplying weapons to terrorist organizations across 3 continents. His network had put surface-to-air missiles in the hands of extremists, armor-piercing rounds into conflict zones, and enough plastic explosives to level city blocks. The CIA had spent 8 years tracking him before finally capturing him in a joint operation with Interpol in Prague. He had been at ADX Florence for 14 months, kept in the most isolated wing of the facility, away from even the other Supermax inmates. Someone had wanted him very, very quiet. And now someone had wanted him dead. Reeves stood in the cell where Volkov had spent his final hours, the concrete walls still bearing the faint chemical trace of luminol spray from the forensic team. The official autopsy reported asphyxiation, ligature marks consistent with the bedsheet found wrapped around the dead man's neck. But Reeves had read enough staged suicides to know the tells. The angle of the marks was wrong, too horizontal, suggesting Volkov had been strangled while lying down, not hanging. The abrasions on his wrists indicated he had been restrained. And most damning of all, the tiny burst blood vessels in his eyes told a story of struggle, of a man fighting for his life against an attacker he couldn't overcome. The warden, Thomas Caldwell, a 26-year veteran of the Bureau of Prisons, sat across from Reeves in a windowless interview room, his face carved from the same granite determination that had kept ADX Florence running without a major incident for decades. "This facility has never had a murder," Caldwell said, his voice flat, emotionless. "Not in 28 years of operation. What you're suggesting is impossible." "Then explain the deleted footage," Reeves countered. Caldwell's jaw tightened. "Technical malfunction. The system logs show a corrupted file, not a deliberate erasure. And the cell door opening from the outside. Volkov was on medical watch. The door was opened twice that day for meal delivery and once for a scheduled medical check. All documented, all by the book." Reeves leaned forward. "Who delivered his meals?" "Correctional Officer Daniel Hayes, 8-year veteran, spotless record." "I want to talk to him." Caldwell's eyes darkened. "Hayes called in sick the day after Volkov's death. He hasn't returned to work." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Reeves pulled out his phone, already dialing his field office. "I need a location on Daniel Hayes, employed at ADX Florence, Colorado. Priority 1. He looked back at Caldwell. "If Hayes is running, he's either guilty or terrified. Either way, we need him alive." But finding Hayes proved more complicated than anticipated. His apartment in Cannon City was abandoned, his truck found 3 days later in a Walmart parking lot in Pueblo, keys in the ignition, engine cold. His bank accounts showed a single large withdrawal of $9,000 in cash the morning after Volkov's death, just under the $10,000 reporting threshold. His cell phone last pinged off a tower near the New Mexico border before going dark permanently. Daniel Hayes had vanished into the same void where ADX Florence sent its inmates, except he had done it voluntarily. Or so it appeared. Reeves expanded his investigation, pulling security clearance files, financial records, and communication logs for every staff member who had access to Volkov's wing. What he found made his blood run cold. Over the past 6 months, 3 correctional officers had received wire transfers ranging from $15,000 to $30,000 from shell companies registered in the Cayman Islands. The transactions were buried beneath layers of legitimate paychecks and mortgage payments, easy to miss unless you knew exactly what to look for. One of those officers was Daniel Hayes. The other 2 were still working at the facility, walking the corridors, controlling the doors, holding the keys to America's most dangerous criminals. Reeves brought this information to Caldwell, expecting outrage, immediate action, lockdown protocols. Instead, he saw something flash across the warden's face that he had seen 1,000 times in interrogation rooms. Recognition. Caldwell already knew. How long? Reeves asked quietly. Caldwell stood, walked to the reinforced window overlooking the prison yard where inmates were allowed their single hour of outdoor time in chain-link cages that resembled dog kennels. Do you know what it costs to keep one inmate at ADX Florence for a year, Agent Reeves? $78,000. Multiply that by 400 inmates over nearly 3 decades. This facility is a black hole for taxpayer money, and every year, someone in Washington suggests shutting it down, transferring these men to other facilities, saving the budget. That's not an answer. Caldwell turned, and for the first time, Reeves saw the exhaustion beneath the professional veneer, the weight of secrets that had been crushing this man for longer than he cared to admit. 6 months ago, I was contacted by someone claiming to represent certain international interests. They wanted access to Volkov. Not to free him, just to talk to him, to extract information about weapons shipments, terrorist contacts, things the CIA couldn't get during his interrogation. They offered money. A lot of money. I said no. But someone said yes. Caldwell nodded slowly. I started noticing irregularities. Medical visits that weren't scheduled. Maintenance requests in wings that didn't need maintenance. I launched an internal investigation, quietly, trying to identify who had been compromised. And then Volkov turned up dead, and I realized this wasn't about extracting information anymore. Reeves felt the pieces clicking into place, the picture forming into something far more sinister than a simple prison murder. They killed him to keep him quiet. Whatever he told them, whatever information he gave up during those unauthorized visits, it was enough to sign his death warrant. And now Hayes is missing, probably dead in a ditch somewhere between here and the border. What about the other 2 officers on the payroll? Caldwell pulled out a tablet, brought up personnel files. Officer Maria Sanchez and Officer Keith Drummond. Both working the night shift in Range 13, the wing that houses our highest-value political prisoners and intelligence assets. The same wing where El Chapo was housed. The same wing where terrorist masterminds and enemy spies spent their endless days in concrete tombs. If someone had bought access to that corridor, they had bought access to some of the most dangerous secrets in the world, information that could destabilize governments, expose covert operations, and put thousands of lives at risk. Reeves stood abruptly. I need those 2 in custody now, before. The lights went out. Every single bulb, every monitor, every electronic system in the facility died simultaneously, plunging ADX Florence into absolute darkness. Emergency generators should have kicked in within seconds. They didn't. In the sudden silence, broken only by the distant sound of steel doors clicking open, Reeves understood with terrible clarity that they were already too late. Someone had just opened every cell in Range 13, and in that darkness, America's worst nightmares were waking up. The darkness lasted exactly 47 seconds, but in a facility housing the world's most dangerous men, 47 seconds was an eternity. When the emergency generators finally roared to life, bathing the corridors in blood-red emergency lighting, Reeves was already running, his weapon drawn, Caldwell shouting orders into his radio as alarms screamed through the concrete labyrinth. Range 13 was chaos. Cell doors stood open like missing teeth in a jaw of steel, their electromagnetic locks completely overridden. But the inmates hadn't scattered. They hadn't rioted. They stood in their doorways, blinking in the crimson light like creatures emerging from caves, decades of institutionalized obedience warring with the sudden, impossible gift of open space. These were men who had been broken by solitude, their minds rewired by endless isolation. The concept of freedom had become so abstract that even when handed to them, they couldn't quite grasp it. All except one. El Chapo's cell was empty. The concrete box that had held the world's most infamous escape artist for 3 years contained nothing but shadows and the faint scent of soap. Reeves felt his stomach drop. If El Chapo had somehow orchestrated this, if the cartel had reached inside ADX Florence and pulled off the impossible, the ramifications would be catastrophic. Mexico would explode. The drug war would escalate to levels that would make the previous decades look like a rehearsal. But as tactical response teams flooded the corridor, securing inmates and forcing them back into their cells with riot shields and barked commands, Reeves noticed something that stopped him cold. El Chapo's cell wasn't just empty. It was clean, meticulously so, the floor scrubbed, the walls wiped down, no personal effects, no contraband, nothing. It looked exactly like a cell that had been prepared for new occupancy, not abandoned in an escape. "Caldwell," Reeves called out, his voice cutting through the controlled chaos. "When was the last confirmed visual on El Chapo?" The warden pulled up his tablet, fingers flying across the screen, accessing security logs that were now flickering back online as systems rebooted. His face went pale. "Meal delivery this morning at 0600 hours. Officer Sanchez signed off on the delivery." Maria Sanchez, one of the compromised guards. Reeves was already moving toward the control room, taking stairs 3 at a time, his mind racing through possibilities. The control room door was sealed, the security protocols having automatically locked down during the power failure. It took 2 minutes for the technician to override the system. 2 minutes during which Reeves paced like a caged animal, knowing that every second was critical. The door hissed open. Inside, Officer Keith Drummond sat at the master control console, his hand zip-tied behind his back, a gag in his mouth, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead. Officer Maria Sanchez was nowhere to be found, but the access logs told the story. She had used Drummond's credentials to override the door systems, to shut down the cameras in a specific sequence, to create a window of opportunity that lasted exactly 14 minutes. 14 minutes during which she had moved through the facility like a ghost, accessing areas that even most guards couldn't reach. The medical wing. The administrative offices. And finally, the morgue. Reeves felt ice water flood his veins. "Get me down to the morgue. Now." The facility morgue was a small room in the basement, rarely used, designed to temporarily hold a body until it could be transferred to the coroner's office in Denver. It should have contained one occupant, Victor Volkov, awaiting autopsy and official cause of death determination. Instead, it contained 2 bodies, both covered with white sheets. Reeves pulled back the first sheet, revealing Volkov's face, frozen in death, his features somehow more peaceful than they had any right to be. He moved to the second gurney, his hand trembling slightly as he gripped the sheet. He knew what he was going to find before he pulled it back, but the confirmation still hit him like a physical blow. Joaquin Guzman Lora, El Chapo, lay dead on the cold steel table. 2 bullet wounds to the back of the head, execution style, professional, clean. His eyes were closed, his face relaxed, almost serene. He had been dead for hours, possibly since the early morning, long before the power failure, long before the manufactured chaos that had been designed to cover up this moment. Caldwell stared at the body, his face ashen. "This is impossible. How did no one?" "Because Sanchez kept him on the books as alive," Reeves interrupted, the pieces finally falling into place with sickening clarity. "She delivered his meals, filed the required observation reports, maintained the illusion. Meanwhile, she was preparing to move the body out during the chaos. The power failure wasn't an escape attempt. It was a distraction, a way to create enough confusion that she could transfer the body out with the regular morgue pickup, make it look like he died during the incident. But why? Why kill the most high-profile inmate in the facility? The cartel would want him alive, would pay anything for his freedom. Reeves looked at the body, at the man who had escaped death and capture so many times that he had become a legend, a ghost story whispered in the shadows of the drug trade. Because dead men tell no tales. El Chapo knew things, had information about operations, about corrupt officials, about networks that stretched into governments across the Americas. Someone wanted that information to die with him. And they were willing to burn their entire operation inside this facility to make it happen. The manhunt for Maria Sanchez lasted 3 weeks. They found her car abandoned at Denver International Airport, a fake passport in her glove compartment with a name that traced back to a Guatemalan identity theft ring. Security footage showed her boarding a flight to Panama City, then disappearing into the sprawling urban maze where American jurisdiction ended and the shadows of the cartels began. The money trail went cold at a cryptocurrency exchange in Singapore. She had vanished as completely as the inmates of ADX Florence, except she had done it while still breathing. Daniel Hayes's body was discovered 2 months later by a hiker in the San Juan Mountains, a single bullet wound to the back of the head, his body dumped in a ravine where it might never have been found if not for an unusually dry spring that lowered water levels. He had been killed the same day he disappeared, silenced before he could talk, his cooperation bought and then erased. The official story released to the media was carefully crafted, surgically precise in what it omitted. Joaquin Guzman had died of natural causes, a heart attack brought on by the stress of incarceration. Viktor Volkov's death was ruled a suicide, a man unable to cope with the reality of spending the rest of his life in solitary confinement. The power failure was a technical malfunction, quickly resolved, no inmates escaped, no security breached. ADX Florence remained the impenetrable fortress it had always been. But Reeves knew the truth. And in the months that followed, as he continued to pull threads on the investigation that officially didn't exist, he discovered something that kept him awake at night, staring at ceiling fans and wondering how deep the corruption ran. The shell companies that had paid the guards traced back to a network of front corporations that had connections to not just cartels, but to intelligence services from 3 different countries, to private military contractors, to offshore accounts linked to politicians whose names would trigger constitutional crises if revealed. ADX Florence wasn't just a prison. It was a vault, holding secrets that powerful people would kill to protect or expose. And someone had figured out how to crack it, not by breaking inmates out, but by reaching inside and silencing them permanently. 6 months after El Chapo's death, another inmate died at ADX Florence. Then another. Both ruled natural causes. Both men with connections to international intelligence networks. Both men who knew things that someone, somewhere, desperately needed to keep buried. Reeves submitted his reports, made his recommendations, pushed for a complete security overhaul. But the bureaucracy moved slowly, and the facility was expensive to retrofit, and there were always budget concerns, political considerations, classified operations that he didn't have clearance to understand. And so ADX Florence continued its work, burying America's nightmares in concrete tombs, 1 cell at a time. The inmates continued to rot in their 7-by 12-foot boxes, cut off from the world, forgotten by everyone except the people who put them there. The desert wind continued to howl across the empty plateau, carrying with it the whispers of men who had disappeared from the world. But now Reeves knew the truth that kept him checking his rearview mirror, that made him sleep with his service weapon within reach. Some of those men weren't just disappearing from society. They were disappearing permanently, erased by forces that operated in the spaces between governments, between laws, between the cracks in a system that had convinced itself it was impenetrable. The fortress had been breached. And whoever had done it was still out there, still operating, still reaching into the belly of ADX Florence whenever they needed to silence someone who knew too much. 3 weeks ago, Reeves received an encrypted email from an anonymous sender. No text, just a photograph. It showed a correctional officer he didn't recognize, standing in a corridor he knew all too well, range 13, where the highest value targets were kept. The officer was looking directly at the camera, and in his hand, barely visible, was a small piece of paper with a number written on it. Reeves ran the number. It was an inmate identification code. The inmate was scheduled to arrive at ADX Florence in 2 months, a former CIA operative turned whistleblower whose testimony could expose black site operations across the Middle East. The message was clear. The game was still being played. And Reeves was being invited to watch the next move, or perhaps to become a player himself. He stared at that photograph for hours, knowing he should report it, knowing he should walk away, knowing that some shadows were too deep to illuminate without being swallowed by them. But he also knew that somewhere in that fortress of concrete and silence, men were dying, secrets were being buried, and the truth was drowning in the desert. If you think this story ends here, you don't understand how deep the shadows go. There are more names, more bodies, more secrets rotting in the belly of ADX Florence. Hit that subscribe button, because what comes next will make you question everything you thought you knew about justice, about security, about who really controls the keys to America's darkest prison. The next chapter is already being written. And this time, no one is safe.